Karen, hi.
Hi.
It's super exciting to have you with us here in London. So Karen, you and I have known each other for years now, but
Long time.
They get to see each other very often. So it's very exciting.
It's a time and treat.
And I guess we just thought, well, since you're here, and you maybe would talk a bit about why you're here
Sure.
as we chat, but like, since you're here, what a great opportunity to just get together and have a chat and catch up on kind of some of the ways our respective systems are tackling the same broad sets of problems and challenges and the different ways in which we're doing that. We can talk a bit about kind of why that kind of international connection is helpful to us. But maybe just to start with, I mean, for UK folks
Sure.
watching this, they won't know necessarily kind of who you are or who Aspen are. So could just say a bit about Aspen and the FSP.
Sure. Yeah. So hi, I'm Karen. You know that, but your listeners won't, right? Karen Andres. I lead the Inclusive Saving and Investing program at Aspen Financial Security Program. And Aspen Institute, as you know, is one of America's post-World War II institutions, sort of right alongside Bretton Woods. But it is about solving the critical challenges of our time, but through dialogue, leadership, and action. It's this idea that one of the ways that we create the society we want is by providing leaders, broadly speaking, with the knowledge and the networks that they need to go do their job different or better. And so at the Financial Security Program, we focus specifically on all of the household financial challenges that people in America are struggling with. So all the way from income sufficiency and volatility through costs of life, debt, and of course, saving and investing. And so the portfolio that I lead starts with early wealth building, goes through emergency savings, and then all things retirement savings. And how do we make saving and investing work for everybody in America, given its centrality to financial resilience and to long-term wealth?
Very cool. And lots of things we'll pick up on, I guess, in the conversation as we go.
I need you to do the same thing.
Yep.
Because it's not clear to all of Aspen's networks that exactly what Nest Insight does. So tell me about you, Will, and Nest Insight.
For sure. So, we know each other well, Karen, but I'm Will Sandbrook. I run something called Nest Insight. And I guess kind of in a funny way, here in 2025, we're in a similar space to where you guys are, but we maybe got here in a slightly different, more roundabout
Seems to happen a lot.
route. Many years ago, the government, as part of creating an automatic enrolment mandate for pensions in the UK, created a pensions provider institution called Nest, not dissimilar in concept to CalSavers or some of the secure choice programs popping up at state level in the US. So Nest is a defined contribution multi-employer pension provider. But about 10 years ago, as part of growing that provider, and as we got very big and with a particular focus on low and moderate income and investors through the role that we play in the policy, we figured that was a kind of interesting opportunity to do something a bit more for kind of wider public benefit and system shaping. And so we set this thing up called Nest Insight, which is kind of an in-house, we talk about kind of public benefit research and innovation center. We operate for public benefit. Our mission is about helping low moderate income households to build financial security, both now and into retirement. And in pursuing that kind of public benefit mission, we operate in a kind of reasonably arm's length way from Nest day to day, although we're still part of Nest, and you'll hear in Nest's offices.
Lovely.
And I guess kind of our journey, we started with pensions focused work. And we did a lot of our early work was on how to get people to engage more with their retirement savings. But over time, and actually, in large part inspired by conversations with you and some of your colleagues in other organizations thinking about this in different ways, we kind of realized that pensions is just a product category, right? Or in the US, a part of the tax code, really. And what really matters in helping people build lifelong financial security is the whole of their household balance sheet. And so over time, we've sort of come to think much more about what are the solutions that evidentially can be shown to work to help people to build financial security, both for the short term and into the long term, and understanding more about how those things interconnect, and again, drawing on some of your work to do that. So that's what we do, and we're thinking about a lot of the same topics that you are. And I guess maybe a good way into that would just be to say, here we are. What's exciting you guys in the US sort of policy horizon right now across that whole, inclusive wealth agenda?
Well, as you rightly point out, there is in the US, there's no such thing as sort of really retirement savings policy. Right? We have tax policy, and we have the Department of Labor, which is about labor protections. And those two things where they intersect is where you get a lot of retirement policy. But we're not fortunate to have. There's no minister of pensions, right, in the US. And a lot of what I'm hoping you'll talk about will make me envious that you guys can have sort of a retirement or pensions strategy. That said, we have had some really interesting legislative developments over the past couple of years that are relevant to sort of retirement savings and all of the inputs that support it. In quick succession, we had a couple of bills, Secure 1 and Secure 2, beginning in 2019. And those bills had a lot in there about retirement savings. And some stuff is very technical, many of which were sort of are required. Like, remember the fiduciary standard is different in the US. The fiduciary responsibility sits with the employer, which of course complicates our system a bit and leads to some pretty significant gaps in access. But employers have been busy kind of working through, and the record keepers have been busy working through that list of requirements from Secure 1 and Secure 2. But there are some really exciting optional, but sort of some provisions in there that really support financial resilience. So, and Secure 2 in particular, the one that we're most excited about and had a part in shaping, were what's called the Pension-Linked Emergency Savings Account, or the PLESA. So emergency savings in the workplace in the US, there are sort of two flavors of ice cream. One is out of plan, so sort of sitting next to the 401k plan, and the other is in plan, or this PLESA. And most of the growth, right, we step back, it's still a very nascent benefit, right? Emergency savings in the workplace is a nascent benefit in the US. There are a few million workers who have access to it, but it has yet to reach scale. But we are seeing that most of the growth has been in the out-of-plan space. The legislation, the provisions from Secure 2.0 allow for this in-plan version. And why that matters is that enables automatic enrollment. So right now, it sort of have this two sides of the same coin. There are two forms of emergency savings. One form is currently more popular, more of it in market. Automatic enrollment, not feasible for that particular kind. We have another form, the PLESA, the in-plan option, which does allow for automatic enrollment, but is less popular. Why is that? Some of it is a record keeper technology build. They're more complicated. An out-of-plan is pretty simple. A PLESA is more complicated. There are caps on contributions that have to be managed with technology, but there are some fixes, I think, in the works that could help streamline that. But I think we're still in the early innings of seeing what employer take-up will look like. We are starting to see some record keepers. T. Rowe Price is a notable one who's putting that in the market. So we kind of have a few different versions of flower growing in the hothouse. And we'll see how these different versions play out in the market over time, probably with some policy fixes on the PLESA to make it easier to build and implement.
And what's so we did an event with Commonwealth, who you know very well, a few months ago, kind of starting to evaluate how those secure measures around emergency savings have played out. I think kind of a year or so ago, we spoke to some of your colleagues, and the general sense was a bit kind of down. These provisions were there, but they weren't maybe taking off yet. And then 6 months ago, it was definitely more positive, and the T. Rowe Price stuff. Like, where's your mood on Secure 2 and emergency savings? Like, are you pleased with how things are progressing? Is there a lot more to do?
I mean, I think the important thing, what Secure 2.0 did was it planted a flag and said, automatic enrollment needs to be possible for emergency savings, right? And it dealt with one particular version, but it sent an important signal, right? And I think it's too early to say that a PLESA is or is not going to be a solution. Again, there are ways we can simplify it, and there are already plans in the works, right? And if there's a potential Secure 3, some of these provisions could be included in such a package. But I think what it mostly did was send a really strong signal that emergency savings are so important for financial resilience and to support, and in the US, prevent pre-retirement withdrawals from workplace retirement plans, that we support automatic enrollment into those. I think that there's a really important set of work to automate out of plan also. It's a separate set of regulators. And so there's sort of us, right? You have one.
No, we have more than one regulator too. So.
Well, we've got quite a list. And so it involves a different set of players and actors, but it is doable. Like, over time, I think we should be able to automate out of plan as well, so that every employer, regardless of what solution they may choose, has the opportunity to auto-enroll employees into it. Yeah. Cool. So that's something that's new. I also want to talk about Trump accounts as a new thing, just to fly. We can come back to it, but I want to get to what's new for you guys. So in what is called HR 1, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that was passed in July, there's a set of provisions. Like, that bill does a lot of things that I'll just say are probably not going to support the financial security, if not be detrimental, in some ways, especially to low-income households with public benefits cuts. That said, there are provisions about what's called Trump accounts, and it is a pretty big swing for America at early wealth building, not dissimilar to what you all tried with child trust funds. And it's effectively $1,000. There's a pilot period for a few years. Any baby in America born in that period can get $1,000 from the government deposited into a modified traditional IRA, into a broad-based index of U.S. equities.
That's spell out IRA for us.
Individual retirement account. Thank you. Yes. Not dissimilar from your ISA.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
Yes,
Pretty similar.
Very similar.
But this account would allow, any child under 18 will be eligible for one. Babies born between this period and these 3 years will be eligible for funding. And then it will sit to, grow in the stock market across 18 years when it is available to be used for a variety of wealth building purposes. So we've been doing a lot of work to understand these accounts, to make sure other stakeholders in the ecosystem of financial well-being understand what is at stake here, which is a lot of wealth building for low-income households, depending on how it's built and implemented. And so we've been digging in on what it would take to make sure that the households who need it the most stand to benefit from it. That's part of why we're here.
Right. And we should say, I guess, thinking about kind of why these international conversations are helpful. So
helpful.
Right? So in the same breath, you've described a set of things on secure and emergency savings, which we're trying really hard to learn from as we think about emergency savings implementation here. And at the same time, you're over here in part because after we finish doing this, we're going to have a meeting with some of the people who are involved in the implementation of child trust funds, so you guys can help figure out kind of what worked well and what didn't.
Incredibly valuable.
Right.
Incredibly valuable. That's right. Yeah. Tell me what's new in the UK.
Yeah, so interestingly, I guess, kind of picking up on some of what you were saying around the planting of flags. Like, there's a couple of big things going on that are kind of in the world as we're thinking about it. So, the first is that 20 years ago, the UK's auto-enroll agenda, the sort of auto-enrollment mandate on all UK employers, was born out of an independent pensions commission, which was a pretty awesome, actually, example of apolitical, evidence-based policy making, right? So the government appointed this independent commission. It was drawn from across kind of labour representation, industry representation, academia. It took a long time to think about the evidence base and then propose changes to the UK retirement system, which have lasted the 20 years since, right? So that's partly about changes to Pillar 1 and the rules around the state pension, but fundamentally it was about the creation of this mandate to auto-enroll all eligible workers into a qualifying workers pension plan. So that policy's kind of worked really well. I guess equally 20 years has passed since it was designed and the 15 years since it was first enacted. And there are definitely aspects of it that need to be built on or rethought. And so one very exciting thing that's happening here is that there is now a new pensions commission. It was announced earlier this year. Its remit is primarily focused on the private pension system and to think about challenges around adequacy and fairness in that system. Is it capturing the right people at the right kinds of levels? It's made up of one of the original pensions commissioners, Jeannie Drake, and then a couple of other independent commissioners, and they're up and running now. In fact, we've met with some of them this morning to talk about some of our research. And they're asking some really fundamental questions about how should that auto-enrollment framework evolve. That's a very exciting thing in the retirement space, but it's also exciting for us because at the launch of that commission, one of the things that the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said was, as part of thinking through this fairness adequacy interaction, one of the things we want the commission to look at is these sidecar savings models, and is there a space for them within the pensions policy space?
Right.
Like, do they fit within and serve a set of goals within the pensions policy space? That's kind of important and interesting, and that I'm sure they will want to look at Secure 2 implementation as part of the evidence base for that. And then the other thing that's been really exciting is that just yesterday, the Treasury Department, our Treasury Department, launched the UK's financial inclusion strategy, which we've all been waiting for for a long time. And it is super exciting. And in particular, from our perspective, pensions was out of scope of that. So that's being dealt with on the pension commission side. But from a kind of broader financial resilience perspective, there is a whole section in that strategy on savings and helping people access small amounts of emergency savings. We have a huge problem in this country, much as you do, with many, many people who have no or very little kind of cash savings on hand to deal with an emergency. And really, almost all of that section of the strategy is about payroll savings models, and is built on the trials that we've run around different variations of payroll savings. And it's a very clear flag on behalf of government saying we think these models are a good idea, and we want to see how they're going to scale. And the government's launched a national coalition on payroll savings, which we're going to be helping to convene, which is about bringing employers who are already doing things together to talk about what they can do and what more could be done. So that's a huge step forward. And I think, I just reflect, way too early to know how that's going to play out in practice. But to your point about planting a flag, like, it matters when government and policymakers say, like, this is a solution that we think we can get behind.
Right.
That on its own sense signals to people and will create momentum. So I think between that's two flags, both counting it as in scope of the pensions policy thinking, and separately addressing the sort of path to more voluntary scaling up of those models within a sort of financial inclusion remit. Those are two kind of super important steps forward. What I would say, I guess, for sort of perhaps some of your kind of constituency who might be watching or listening, so we don't have an in-plan, out-of-plan dichotomy as such. You can't have an in-plan.
You don't have a RISA.
We don't, and we don't have any way. There's no way once money's in our pension system of getting it out again pre-retirement.
Big difference.
So you can't have an in-plan model, or you'd have to change a number of laws to make that possible. But we have tested both something more like what you would think of as a pure out-of-plan option, and a version that does have a kind of rollover
spillover feature, right? That is a key difference, regardless of the tax implications and why we have in-plan, out-of-plan. Functionally for the household, the difference would be the spillover feature.
Right. And I think what's super clear and very common across the two systems is this focus on auto-enrolment. Right. So all the work that we've done suggests that payroll savings models are a good thing in any version, but are not really going to address a problem at scale unless they're offered on an auto-enrolled basis. And some of the trials that we've done have been offered on an auto-enrolled basis. And what the strategy said very clearly yesterday is that these models are really promising, and we should look at how they could be helped to scale. So that's very exciting.
Well, during the Biden administration, we also released our first ever U.S. the United States, the Department of the Treasury released a U.S. national financial inclusion strategy. And we've been working with folks there to help sort of bring the right stakeholders to the table, because it needed to be, our definition of financial inclusion needed to be expanded. For years in the US, financial inclusion has been like bank account access, right? Or credit access, right? Essentials, absolutely. But what's exciting about the strategy that the Biden administration released is that it was much more expansive in a few ways. One, it wasn't just about access to things. It was how well do those things work that we're providing access to? Because it turns out that really, really matters. And do they help produce good outcomes, measurable increases in financial well-being? And then the second thing it did was it included public benefits, right? So for those who are eligible, right, access to well-designed public benefits like SNAP, right, or HUD vouchers, right, housing support. So food buying assistance, home, rental assistance, et cetera. And then went all the way through to saving and investment, which I think it is kind of new that saving and investing would be included in a financial inclusion strategy. But I think, to be so bold, I think that we're both at a moment maybe where the idea of wealth, right, that we need income and assets, right, that financial security, yes, is about stability as an input or an on-ramp, right? These two things are interlinked, and you can't really, financial inclusion isn't only about the basics, right? Because there's such an input to the longer term goals of security and wealth, which I think is exciting.
I mean, I agree. And I think there's a couple of things I'd pick up where there are some parallels here. So I guess, so we picked up in your financial inclusion strategy on this move from, is inclusion about availability or is it about participation?
That's right.
And of course, as we know from all the behavioral economics and why does auto-enrollment work so well, it's because you can make a plan available, you make a pension plan available or a savings plan available to someone, but they won't do it. Use it, right? And so I think that focus is clear in our new strategy, new financial inclusion strategy as well, and is really, really important. I guess I just wanted to come back. So we're bouncing around a little bit here. I want to come back to something on emergency savings. You talked about the pensions linked. You talked about emergency savings accounts, pensions linked and out of plan.
Yes.
There's some other stuff in Secure, isn't there, around financial resilience, particularly the sort of $1,000 withdrawal thing. Can you say a bit more about that as well?
Right. So there's a provision in Secure 2.0 about another way to access liquidity. Right. So remembering that for us, that access to liquidity is so important because it reduces pre-retirement withdrawals that are costly and that damage your long-term trajectory for saving and investing, right, in the 401k. So what we're seeing right now really is that it's not just emergency savings where we're seeing experimentation and new models. We're seeing a whole range of liquidity solutions in the workplace. And one of those is the $1,000 withdrawal provision from Secure 2.0, where, and this is optional, right? Plans can choose to implement this, like all of these solutions, but where once a year you could withdraw $1,000 penalty free from your plan, and then you could choose to pay it back into the plan over a series of 3 years. Now, this is separate and apart from a plan loan provision, which also exists as a form of liquidity. But I think it's still early days on the $1,000 withdrawal also. And I think we're eager. We actually, and I know Guillermo from your team will be joining us in a few weeks in Washington, D.C. for our Workers' Wealth Lab, which is a lot about sort of aggregating and testing out all of the solutions and plan design changes, basically building a better 401k, right? The things kind of like you, right? You're saying, okay, we've been at this for 20 years. Let's refresh what we know to be true. What's the future of automatic enrollment need to look like as the workforce evolves and as we look back at the data? I think we're at the same point with the 401k, and we are looking back and saying, well, what do we know for sure about what worked and didn't? Because, there's data from here and David Laibson, right, at Harvard saying automatic enrollment, auto escalation, maybe they don't work as well, or they're having consequences maybe we didn't anticipate, right? Or we thought they'd be more effective than they are. We're seeing some pretty significant differences in pre-retirement withdrawal usage among different employee populations, even when you control for income. Okay, well, that's a problem to go solve. And it goes on to asset allocation and portability, et cetera. So I think it's about time for I think reboot is too strong, but we're definitely trying to give the 401k a glow up. And I think that the $1,000 withdrawal provision is yet one more thing that we should be testing to see how powerful that is at both supporting that short-term liquidity need and helping limit some of the pre-retirement withdrawals that do make rational economic sense, but are not what the mousetrap was built for.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's maybe worth saying, I guess, correct me if this is not your understanding, but the US DC system is quite a lot more mature than the UK. So the average account balances are much higher. So $1,000 withdrawal maybe doesn't look as risky or challenging as a proportion of the total fund that it may look here. The flip side being the system here is much more universal. So the folks who in the US maybe don't have a plan, who may also be those who have the highest liquidity need, don't have access to that, which at least here, kind of more or less everyone has a plan, but the account balances are still smaller, younger and smaller, and therefore, so there are some differences.
Just to level set, we're talking 56 million people, on the order of that many people do not have access to a workplace plan in the US. A whole nation's worth of people do not have access to workplace plans.
And who are presumably on the whole working for smaller firms,
disproportionately lower
higher
income
turnover.
That's right.
Same challenge. I just want to pick up. So you talked about. You said you were seeing some significant differences in 401k account balances, even controlling for income between different population groups. And I think I'm right in saying that the data that you get that from, which is something you've done with some partners.
That's right.
Morningstar. Part of that, am I right in saying that one of the indicators is account balances are lower for people who enter into this challenge without other sources of liquidity?
That's right.
So to speak to,
that's right.
Why is helping people have a cash buffer good for their retirement?
Oh,
well,
we're generating. We'll have data coming out in the next few weeks, where we're even in survey data, we're seeing early indicators that people who have access to an emergency savings account will contribute more to their 401k, right? So there's a ton of data, right? So what we've done over the past few years in partnership with Morningstar Retirement and DCIA, which is the Defined Contribution Institutional Investment Association in the US, we have built a novel database that connects transactional data from administrative data from retirement plans with employee demographic data. Anonymously, right? It's all, no PII, thanks. But we can see, for employers who they provide their data and say, help us see specifically who is using the plan in what way, right? Rather than look at these averages. And what you can see are some patterns emerging about the ways that some of the employers bring gender, some bring gender and race. We've had some bring gender, race, and marital status. Marital status is a very powerful predictor of how people will use a retirement plan. But the point is to get a level of granularity that allows us to see that just because we thought we'd autoed this thing up. We thought we had created so many automatic features that the plan would just work the same for everybody.
Yep.
And it's not. In the US, what we see is, so Black women, Black men, Hispanic men and women, taking, even when you control for income, right? So pay the same as, like, let's just say white male counterparts, taking more frequent pre-retirement withdrawals as a larger percentage of their balance, right? Even I asked Jenny Vanderhei at Morningstar to calculate this for me. And what we found was, just to quantify this, in our database, which is, several 100,000 401k participants. And I'm not saying this is fully nationally representative, but it is over several 100,000 participants in a variety of differently designed plans. If the median Black female employee in that database, if you could not eliminate her pre-retirement withdrawals entirely, but just bring them up to the sort of the same level as the median white male employee, again, they're paid the same, you would increase her balance by $128,000 over a working lifetime, right? That's how powerful these pre-retirement withdrawals are, because ours come with a 10% penalty, right? So most of them do. So all to say, there's a lot of gold in these hills, right? For lower income workers, especially, right? This stuff matters the most for people with the smaller balances. If we can tweak and provide liquidity that is the go-to, right? The first line of defense, instead of going to the 401k plan, which again, rational economic choice. If those are the savings you have, it's not well designed for liquidity. So let's give cheap or free liquidity. You'll see we see pre-retirement withdrawals come down when you offer cheap liquidity like emergency savings. And like I said, we're starting to see early indications that we may even see a bump up in contributions when people have access to and are using an emergency savings account.
Good. There's something you talked about. I mean, I should make a big shout out for that work, right? The collaborative, the
Workers' Welfare. We've simplified it. Call it the Workers' Welfare.
But like I'd encourage anyone to go and look at the underlying data, because of what you've done is something that we've been trying to do as well, and which I think speaks to your point about some critical reevaluation of the success of auto-enrollment programs. Because the thing, when we started these programs, everyone's measure of success was how many people opt out and are they funding their accounts?
Right.
And as we get more data and put that data together in different ways, we can ask more critical questions like, even if they stay in and they fund their accounts, what else is going on in their household balance sheets? And I think we should be clear. Like, I haven't seen any data that suggests that universal auto-enrollment programs are a bad idea. I mean, they've been transformational in addressing retirement participation, pension participation in this country and elsewhere where they've been used. But we should dive in, and we should look at, for example, the work that we did looking at how people's borrowing behaviours interact with being auto-enrolled, and we should acknowledge that they raise some questions about the design of the policy. And I think that's the opportunity here with the Pensions Commission, is to sort of step back and say, what do we know now that we didn't know 15, 20 years ago, simply by having done the policy and finding more sophisticated ways to evaluate it and be constructively critical of how it could improve in the future. And that for us is a lot of why, inspired again by the kinds of work that you guys have been doing, this idea that financial security in retirement has a wider set of inputs and solutions than simply contributions to a pension.
It's not just a pile of money.
Right. It's what goes alongside that. It's what's your housing tenure? Do you own your home or do you rent it? It's what debt did you take into retirement with you that might wipe out the first £50,000 or dollars of your DC account if you have to use it to pay down debts that you can no longer earn away because your labour income has started to just decrease. And so I think kind of that more holistic way of thinking about it, which again I think we share and we talked a lot about, is really helpful in thinking about what is the next iteration of all these policies that like to make kind of even better.
Now, you just talked about housing. Aren't you all doing? We've been talking about this. We've been sniffing around together this intersection of housing costs, ownership, equity, times retirement savings for some time. You all are doing some interesting work on that, aren't you?
We are, and we haven't published it yet, so I won't
don't give it
talk
away
in great detail about where it's going. But I guess just to reflect, so 3 or 4 years ago now, at an event that you guys hosted, we did a panel on how does the retirement system and how home ownership interact? How do these things? How should they interact? Recognizing that there was some work done here a couple of years ago that suggested that the cost, the amount more you would need in your DC fund to be a private renter through retirement versus if you owned your home outright is like £200,000 just for a 2-bed flat. To privately rent a 2-bed flat for an average retirement duration, right? You need an extra £200,000 in your DC account. that's like more than the average total DC savings people have when they retire today, right? So the impact on your retirement,
right,
income security,
there it goes.
of being a private renter is massive, and so that does give rise to a question, which is an obvious question. Which is, well, look, if we've created universal wealth building over here through pensions auto-enrolment, but we've got declining home ownership rates, to what extent might some of that wealth be better used to support people getting on the housing ladder and reaching retirement with an asset and without this kind of, owing 20 years of private rent? And so we've been trying to explore from a range of different perspectives, like, what's the value in that logic?
Right.
Is that good? Is helping people, is allowing people to access their retirement wealth in some way to support home ownership a good idea? And without kind of without saying too much about the results, I think I think what emerges is a pretty nuanced picture in which both it is clearly true that if tapping into a bit of your pension's wealth earlier on in life enables you to reach retirement as a homeowner, it has a pretty clearly positive impact on your overall lifetime wealth and income. But at the same time, and this is something we've talked and thought a lot about, and I think the Commission is going to have to think a lot about, there's a real risk here that if we suddenly go from universal pensions auto-enrolment working pretty well to trying to also make it solve cash resilience, home ownership, and what else? Social care costs. Right, you can't. There's a public consent risk.
That's right.
And there is an overload risk.
That's right.
And so I think kind of what I imagine the Commission will spend some of their time thinking about. Certainly, what we think about is kind of what's the load bearing capacity of that system to could it solve one or two more problems in a holistic way? And if it could, where would you focus? Right. So part of the sort of thinking we're doing about housing fits into that broader sort of question of even if in isolation there are some reasons to think it's a good idea. Is it the right next step? It's a pretty big set of questions. So that's where that work's been kind of taking us.
I mean, it feels there's a similar conversation in the US. We have the same dynamics, right? The cost of housing is astronomical. We also do not have universal health care and no functional long-term care insurance market. And so we're having the same issue where are we asking too much of this of the defined contribution system for those for whom it is even working? It also feels like it's happening in a moment where sort of across both economies, these things that we always held as like, this is the way you build wealth. Some of the tectonic plates are shifting a little bit, right? Is home ownership really still a viable path? Also, that equity isn't at the moment terribly liquid. So that's a lockup, right, of money. 401k, the public markets are evolving and changing. Is that still, it just, for a lot of reasons, it feels like sort of stepping back to say, what is the right label to put on this system? What is its core kind of functional purpose? What have we seen that works? What do we need to tweak kind of for the future? And not to say it's been a raging success for those who've had access, but I think there's a bit of some existential questions about its purpose and function in a changing economy.
Well, I think also, just narrowly on the kind of housing question, because you've raised a bunch of really, really important questions.
Too much, sorry.
No, it's great. But even narrowly on the housing question, the other thing we've sort of started to ask as part of our work on this is thinking more from the supply side. So there's this kind of global shift in DC investment strategies towards illiquids and alternative asset classes.
It's hot in the US right now.
Well, here too, right? And that's another reason you're over here, because we spend some time speaking to folks about this later in the week. But one kind of obvious question is, well, look, if in the UK we have a lack of supply of affordable housing, and so the houses aren't necessarily there for people, particularly on kind of lower incomes, to buy, even if they have the deposit.
That's right.
So actually, could part of the solution here be using institutional assets? Could affordable homes, affordable housing be a more investable asset class for big pension funds and sort of DC assets? And again, I think the answer to that may very well be possible, and is almost a more attractive solution than giving people access to their savings to buy a house, because the risk if you do that and you don't solve housing supply is just inflate prices, right? I mean, you just give people wealth to buy houses kind of overnight by allowing them to access their DC schemes, and you don't address supply.
There's a lot more idiosyncratic risk with one house as opposed to a diversified portfolio of real estate. Right. Yeah. No, I think there's a lot to think through. That's a very hot and I'm not going to say nascent conversation in the US, but it's sort of rising to the top as we look at the changing nature of public markets in the US, the public equity markets, and where the returns are coming from, the decline of IPOs. And I think there are some there's a lot to sort of work out about how you would make that part of a defined contribution scheme. I mean, pension funds, pensions as in defined benefit pensions in the US have been like, the UAW, the United Auto Workers, or CalPERS, right? These have been using these investment strategies for a long time.
Right.
So that's not new that we would make that part of a retirement portfolio, but it is new in a defined contribution context. And so I think that there's a lot of sort of hashing that out left to go.
Right. And interesting, I mean, all these things connect, right? So one of our questions about the housing conversation and the emergency savings conversation and sort of early access questions is, if over here you're moving towards a world where an increasing amount of the assets are in illiquid asset classes, you can't separately over here place higher liquidity requirements on the system by giving people more ways of taking money out, right? Because at some point, those two things
are going to collide.
And suddenly you're upsetting the sort of preferred investment strategies of long horizon investors by saying, but you've got to keep enough money liquid to give people to buy a house or to pay for an emergency. I think, my guess is we're not that close to that being a problem because our private market allocations are still relatively low. But over time, those two things can absolutely kind of meet in the middle. So that's kind of getting the total design of the system right becomes really important.
It's a lot to work out.
Yeah. It's why we're so busy all the time. So I guess, I could talk to you all day, Karen, about all these things. I guess the one thing we maybe could just spend a few more minutes on, at least from my perspective, is Trump accounts. So I'd just love to hear more about where is that conversation at right now? Sure. How close to implementation? What do you think the big kind of ticket questions are? What are you hoping to find out later when we chat to some experts about it?
Yeah. Well, so I think we are excited by the ambition, right? It's a big swing. It's a lot of money. It's a big commitment. And this has been a historically bipartisan issue in the US. There are early wealth building accounts in various forms exist in a lot of places in the US, sometimes at the state level, usually, but we have a number of different vehicles for it, right? 529s and bank accounts and other forms of account.
I love the fact that you guys continue to name every financial product you can after a piece of the tax code.
Yeah, do you like that?
You need some marketeers to help you.
That's great branding. Well, Trump accounts certainly have a name, right? Speaking of branding. But I think it's exciting to see what has historically been a bipartisan issue, that picked up by Republicans and passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last July. I think the work ahead is, and then U.S. Treasury is working on this. The team that actually is working on our Savers Match, which I failed to mention as part of Secure 2.0, a government match starting in 2027, a government retirement savings match for low-income savers, right? Which is terrific. I mean, there's every analysis we see is they wouldn't help make retirement savings progressive and really effective for those who take advantage of it. So there's a lot of work for Treasury to do to build that, because those rails actually don't currently exist for the money to get from Treasury into accounts. So it's the same team that's tasked with building out the Trump accounts. So it's ambitious. That's a big lift. And there's a lot we don't know yet about exactly how they're going to be implemented. Of course, as we all know, automatic enrollment would be the most effective mechanism for making sure that those lower income and low wealth households benefit from this. It may be that they go an opt-in route in the beginning. I think it's still to be determined. But you can imagine a route to not only universal funded accounts for babies, but if you play that out over a lifetime, right? This is a modified individual retirement account. So, it's sort of like Cinderella when the account turns 18 and the kid is no longer a baby and they're about to, maybe they're entering the workforce or, going to school. What is it that the carriage turns into a pumpkin at midnight? That account becomes a retirement account. Right. And I think the Trump accounts for teenagers use case is also really interesting for those of us in the retirement world, because what you guys have struggled with and what we have struggled with, and I'm not aware of any DC system globally that has solved for the portable retirement accounts for those who are not going to be attached to a traditional workforce, right? Or to a traditional workplace. So we could have, if we got this right, we could have a generation of teenagers heading into the next phase of their lives with a retirement account in hand that could be their portable account and sort of the centralized receptacle for all of these plans that they kind of build up. The small pots, this helps solve our small pots problem and also our access problem. There's a lot to do to get it from where it is to there, but this is really some essential legislative infrastructure that is really exciting to think about.
And I mean, it's fascinating because kind of hard as it is to get workers to engage with their retirement accounts, I reckon it'd be significantly easier to get teenagers to engage with the fact that they were heading towards inheriting an asset at 18 that was potentially pretty meaningful, right? So that is a huge opportunity. It was risky as well. And I guess one of the things I wish we'd done more to understand here, and there may still be time to do it, but it's kind of for people who did go through child trust funds and whose accounts have matured, what have they done with the money, right?
Right. What have they done with it? I'm dying to know.
Right.
Someone do this research or fund us to do the research with you to ask, because I think that's one of the core questions and always has been in early wealth building is, and there's look, we all know teenagers. I have a 12-year-old, so not teenager yet, but what would my child do if he got to 18 and had suddenly access to $10,000? Right. Shudder to think. I don't know. At this point, he would buy baseball cards. But but really, what is the evidence? Right. What do people do with it, and what decisions do they make? And should we try to limit the use cases?
Do you need timelines or not?
Or not? I think we actually, this legislation does limit it, right? It's approved uses of the money. Our education, home ownership, retirement. Entrepreneurship is not, like starting a small business it's not an approved sort of penalty-free use. You can take the money out and take a 10% penalty for that use or other uses. But I think there's a lot to be learned from your all's experiment. Because I think right now there are kids still turning 18, getting access to this money. Yeah.
And certainly kids who are not so far post 18 that you could still kind of find them.
What did you do with it? That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Great. It's exciting. It
is exciting. It's a big opportunity for America, which is a lot of work to do to get it right and to make sure that we get everybody in, right? And I think that counsels toward automatic enrollment ultimately. Yeah. No question. No, that makes sense. We know that from retirement. Right. You know that from retirement.
Well, and from emergency savings.
Everything. Right. All roads lead to automatic enrollment.
So I guess maybe we should wrap up with looking to the future a bit.
Yeah.
We talked about this before we started. So what's your, where do you, as you sort of project yourself forward 5 years around retirement savings, kind of wealth building, what are you worried about, or what are you excited about? Like, what do you think of it?
What keeps me up at night thinking about the future? I think it's about, maybe this is me as a parent. Maybe that's that side of my brain, but AI, the effect of AI on our labor market is unclear, unknown. And maybe, the doomsday predictions are overblown, or maybe they're underselling it. I don't know. But it does seem like, regardless, we are already seeing pretty fundamental changes to our labor markets, to our workforce, and the kinds of jobs people have access to, or gig independent, et-cetera. And I am simultaneously troubled that we don't yet have a solution. We don't have a good retirement saving solution that not that some people have, but that works as well as a workplace plan can, right? How do we replicate the experience of a workplace retirement savings plan in a retail context, if that makes sense, in a portable context? So I am worried that we don't have that. And also that feels like the place where there's opportunity to me. Yeah. What about you? What's keeping you up at night on retirement savings in the future?
So probably a lot of the same things. And I guess, there is opportunity in what you describe as well as risk.
Yes.
I guess I'm sort of super seized of the idea of what's possible with the combination of sort of innovation in the fintech space, open banking, AI. Like in the end, kind of people, particularly people with lower, moderate incomes or volatile incomes, kind of at the moment we ask them to make impossible choices about the sort of marginal pound, right? If they get to a place where they can do a bit of saving or investing or put some money in for a pension or for a house, we sort of created this system where everything's very binary. If you put it in a pension, you can't get it back again. If you put it in a lifetime ISA here, which is a kind of home ownership targeted account, you can only get it back if you buy a home before you're age 40, right? So everything you have to make these kind of very binary choices, sometimes when you're as young as 21 and coming out of, college or school. And it's very difficult. This isn't a complexity problem, it's an uncertainty problem, right? Like people can't know enough about their future selves to know which is going to be a good choice. And then there's a risk of regret. And I think that means some people just save less in total than, there's the kind of, well, screw it, heuristic. I can't fix this, I won't do anything. Whereas, if you look at some of the opportunities around how open banking and integrated data from different sources can help channel, it goes back to auto-enrolment, but it becomes about how do you help design more personalized defaults for people that help their money to flow around. And there's a product design question. How do you design hybrid products that can effectively serve more than one purpose?
Right.
And how do you plumb the system so that the money flows into those places in ways that at least reduce the risk that you regret it later?
And what AI can do to help, and personal data can help automate that next dollar decision is exciting.
Right.
But there's a lot to go between now and that.
There's a huge amount. And then you're absolutely right. All this kind of disruption in the labour market. We have a pretty successful but fundamentally workplace located retirement system in a world where traditional workplaces may be less important in the future. Who knows? Depends which version of the future of AI you believe.
Right.
And going back to what I was saying earlier, I think we here in the UK, when we think about pensions policy, quite rightly want to preserve the gains of the auto-enrolment program. Right. It's been a really successful, maybe, with some critical reappraisal, but a really successful intervention.
We envy it deeply.
Right. And lots of people do. And we are rightly, I think, kind of very proud of it. But leaning into the reality that it was designed in a slightly different world that's changing very quickly, recognizing the role of the workplace is different, and recognize that in the future, particularly our concept of a pension, which is a very illiquid, locked up forever product, may just have less salience in the future, and for younger generations who are dealing with a slightly different set of problems. And if we can my sort of dream would be if we can find ways of evolving auto-enrolment into its next stage that do preserve those gains and keep this kind of universal wealth building for later life success.
For increasingly longer lives.
But doing ways that better deal with some of those changes, some of those flexibilities. That's, whether or not that's possible, I don't know. How quickly it's possible, I don't know. But that's I guess, why we do the work that we do. And so trying to help think through what that might look like.
And your illiquid system, your lockdown system, make it a little more liquid. Our really liquid system, make it a little less.
Right.
And we meet in the middle.
Which is why we have these conversations in the first place, right? So that feels like I think we've probably run way over our allotted time.
We blew right through it.
It's going to be more than one episode of this conversation, but that's been wonderful. Thank you, Karen.
Fun as always.
For hanging out with us and sharing your brilliant thoughts.
Thank you.